Karen, snapping. Ugh, seriously? You're still cleaning? Don't you people have schedules? I nearly slipped because of your mess. W. Brooks, quietly. The sign's right there, ma'am. Floor's still wet. Oh, please. Maybe if you spent less time talking and more time doing your job, people like me wouldn't have to risk breaking our necks just to get inside. People who actually work hard, not whatever this is, mopping floors while real professionals are on their way to court. W. Brooks, still calm. Everybody's work keeps this place standing, ma'am. Karen, cutting him off. Save me the speech, okay? Just move your bucket. You're dripping everywhere. If you can't keep the courthouse clean, maybe you should find a job you can actually handle. He steps aside, nodding once. No anger, just observation. The silence that follows is heavier than her words. Karen, grabbing her folder. Unbelievable. They let anyone in here these days. She walks away, heels tapping. The camera lingers on W. Brooks's face, calm, unreadable, as he looks down at his reflection in the wet marble. She rehearsed the outline. Hastings versus Delgado. Mr. Delgado, renter in a community designed to make renters feel like temporary guests at a country club. A man whose teenage son had hair that defied flattening. An incident at the pool. Her email thread with the subject lines, friendly reminder, second notice, final notice, the triptych of modern bureaucratic intimidation. She would frame it as hygiene, not hierarchy. Safety, not supremacy. She would say standards until the word stopped meaning anything except win. Outside the courtroom, down the corridor, a cart rolled. Plastic bottles in municipal colors, the clink of a timid broom. Karen's hand tightened on her pen. She stared at the brass plaque again. W. M. Brooks. The middle letter offered denial. The mind takes comfort in middle initials. They add distance, as if first names and last names should never be allowed to touch in public. At 8:59, the bailiff spoke in the liturgy of ritual. All rise. Karen rose, shoulders back, mouth set to neutral competence. The door behind the bench remained closed. The judge did not enter. Instead, a different clerk crossed to the bench, whispered to the bailiff, and the bailiff projected without affection, "The court will convene at 9:30. Please remain available." Karen's eyebrows tried to hide in her hairline. She sat, the small violence of delayed authority needling her. Late. She typed a text. Judge late, typical. Then, because she was sometimes clever enough to delete her own tells, she erased typical and sent only the fact. She rose to pace outside. The hallway window offered a view of the plaza, city flags resisting wind with civic stubbornness. Two municipal workers opening a maintenance hatch like a magician, revealing the trap door everyone pretends not to notice. On the sill, a bottle of glass cleaner waited like an unthrown insult. Behind her, from the direction of the lobby, the bleach-clean scent traveled back up the stairwell with the certainty of a recurring dream. She checked her watch. 9:17. The law, like plumbing, was only noticed when it failed. She had learned that lesson early and then misunderstood it on purpose. When they reconvened, the bailiff's cadence did not seek forgiveness. All rise. The door opened. A judge entered. A woman, mid-40s, white, hair-pinned, robe settling like a black equation. Honduras Margaret Velasquez, the clerk announced, sitting by designation. The brass outside had lied by omission. There are names on doors and names in power, and sometimes they overlap on the hour and sometimes they don't. Relief slid into Karen like heat. Not him. Not the man from the lobby. Not the complication of the wrong lesson too soon. The gavel tapped once, a small noise that asked the room to do arithmetic. "Good morning," Judge Velasquez said. "Department 14 calls the matter of Hastings versus Delgado. Appearances? Ms. Hastings, Karen said, standing. Pro se, HOA president. For respondent, a woman stood, crisp suit, binder thick enough to be mistaken for a part of the building. Ana Diaz, counsel for Mr. Delgado. Velasquez nodded, her eyes scanning the file with the speed of someone who had always done her homework. We're here on petitioner's request for a restraining order and a declaration regarding HOA enforcement authority. Ms. Hastings, you may proceed. Karen's voice behaved, clear without warmth. She told the story from the middle, not the beginning. The pool on a July afternoon, a trio of teenagers, music with bass that made the air feel physical, hair uncontained, water filters theoretically imperiled. The way Mr. Delgado raised his voice, loud enough to carry, she said, approached within 2 feet, precise enough to impress, and the way she felt unsafe. Safety is the universal key. Most doors open when you say it with enough breath. She said standards 4 times and community 6. She avoided property values until the end, when she let it land with the pretend weight of economics, a prosthetic argument used to disguise the limp of something older. Diaz waited like a spring. Your Honor, she began when invited, we have the HOA's own security footage of the pool deck. We also have email threads from the Harbor Ridge Board advising Ms. Hastings that there is no swim cap rule in the CC&Rs and that selective enforcement raises legal concerns. Karen felt blood come and go under her skin, a tide-lacking moon. The screen on the side wall lit. The video was signless, color a touch too blue, like a hotel's idea of day. There was Karen's walk, the one she didn't know she had, the one that read like punctuation, period, period, exclamation point. There was the clipboard. She had not remembered bringing a clipboard. There was Mr. Delgado, barefoot, round-shouldered, palms out, his son, half underwater, a shape that could be any boy trying to understand why his joy had a policy attached to it. There was Karen, 2 fingers up as if directing a silent orchestra, then stabbing toward the gate. There was proximity, and whose feet made it, and whose body made space. No audio. But some truths don't using microphones. They use geometry. Diaz sat. The video stuttered into black. The judge's face remained an instrument with the volume turned down. Ms. Hastings, Velasquez said, you testified you felt physically unsafe. Why did you close distance? Context, Karen said. I was de-escalating. By stepping toward? Karen heard how badly it sounded at the same time she discovered she was certain anyway. Yes, the judge made a small note. On the request to convert a temporary restraining order to permanent relief, I'm disinclined on this record, but I'll hear the rest. They took testimony. They said exhibit like a prayer in a language without vowels. Karen answered carefully and also with the shape of someone who trusts her adjectives. Diaz kept asking for nouns. When the morning ended, Velasquez issued a short order. Petition denied, without prejudice as to refile with additional evidence. On the HOA authority question, the court declined to rule, not a general supervisor of private governance. The bench advised, however, that standards must be written to be enforced and even then, enforced uniformly. It was not a loss, Karen told herself. It was a rehearsal. They set a status conference in 6 weeks. Court adjourned. The officers of the state stood. The state left. In the hallway, Karen took a long breath and called the vice president of the HOA. We're fine, she said. Judge slow-walked it. But the message got through. She did not specify the message. Certainty is a magic trick typically performed with a mirror. She turned toward the escalator. The smell of bleach returned all at once, like a lesson that had been waiting around the corner of a day. At the bottom of the moving stairs, the caution sign stood folded to the wall. compact as a closed argument. The man in the coveralls, W. Brooks, drove his mop in a concluding S-curve and set it upright, the gesture of ending a sentence with a period that knows it's correct. He glanced up. For one unguarded instant, he looked not at her, but through her, through the layer of costuming that protects people like her from seeing the world by casting themselves as the lighting. Then the look softened back into professional neutrality. "Good morning," he said. Not more, not less. Karen's reply arrived 2 beats too late. "You missed a spot there," she said, pointing at what might have been nothing. The smile she arranged on her face failed to disguise that she had converted embarrassment into instruction and called it civic contribution. He followed her finger. "I'll find it," he said, like someone who always does. She left the building with the sensation of having outrun something that did not appear to be chasing her. That night, in her kitchen, overhead lights set to the brightness women are told will help them see themselves better. She reread the HOA bylaws and realized they were untidy. She tightened language as if cinching a belt on a body she refused to admit had changed shape. She edited certain cultural habits may be appropriate elsewhere to Harbor Ridge adheres to common sense standards, which is the sort of translation people perform when they want the same sentence to pass inspection on a different day. She slept in fragments, woken by the echo of a mop wrung dry with a twist that sounded like a clock being corrected. In the weeks that followed, the courthouse lobby returned in pieces, the yellow triangle, the wet loops, the man's voice shaped like patience, the name tag that refused to stop being relevant. She told herself she was remembering a detail. In fact, her memory was warning her about a hinge. 6 weeks later, at 8:47 a.m., she walked back through the revolving doors with the kind of confidence people get from dressing a fear in paperwork. The lobby shone. The mop leaned in a closet. The caution sign was already folded. She took it as a sign that the day had learned its place. Upstairs, depict. 14. Brass plating warms more easily than people do. The plaque looked hospitable. The bailiff held the door. The gallery took their places. Only after she sat did she realize she had chosen the same seat as last time, a superstition disguised as efficiency. "All rise," the bailiff said at 9. The door opened. The judge entered. Karen's will tried to pull up evidence by the roots. "After the last hearing," she said, "Mr. Delgado stared at me in the parking lot. It was a glare. Did he approach? No. Speak? No. Gesture? No. He waited. It hurt more than a reprimand. Staring," he said softly, "is not a battery." She imagined telling him about the lobby, about the mop, about the words you people. She imagined him saying, "Address me as Your Honor now," and imagined disliking him for it. She did not mention the lobby because she knew what justice would look like if he did. It would look like a mirror. They called witnesses. Mrs. Lafferty, who allowed her grandson to cannonball without reprimand. Mr. Nwosu, who received letters about music with aggressive bass when playing High Life on a Sunday afternoon. A lifeguard who testified he had never once fished a clump of hair oils from a filter. The HOA treasurer who couched everything in fog. We were just trying to keep things nice. Fog is a climate that supports mold. Brooks permitted everything relevant and trimmed everything not. He did not mention the lobby. He did not mention coveralls. He did not perform the reveal. He simply embodied it. At recess, Karen stood in the hallway, pretending to read a document she had written. She felt a gravity at her right shoulder and turned. He was there, taking a paper cup from a cooler, filling it with water, walking away without making the air into a trial. His presence did not accuse her. It allowed her to accuse herself. It is a rare and useful cruelty. She went to the restroom and looked at herself under the light designed to be worse than home lighting. She reapplied red like a surgeon retying a stitch. The color was called poise. Marketing is what happens when we agree to lie to mirrors. Back on the record, Diaz asked to mark the HOA's notice schedule. "We see zip codes and surnames cluster," she said. "We see warnings for loud voices to units occupied by families of color and gentle reminders to everybody else. We see aggressive body language applied to fathers and no similar documentation for white teens who swarm the pool on Saturdays. We see a pattern hiding behind the language of standards." "Objection to counsel's rhetoric," Karen said, the word rhetoric pronounced like an accusation. "Sustained as to the commentary," Brooks said, "but the data may come in." Data is the place where euphemism goes to drown. In the afternoon, Brooks asked if either side desired to be heard further. Diaz rested. Karen lifted her chin. "I want the record to reflect," she said, "that I've dedicated hundreds of hours to this community. I've asked for nothing but compliance. If people took pride in where they live, we wouldn't be here. I'm not the villain. I'm the one who shows up." Brooks regarded her, and for the first time that day there was something like a shadow in his eyes. He had heard this speech in other forms, on other days. It is the speech of the self-elected custodian who mistakes proximity to power for proof of virtue. "You are being heard," he said, "and you are being measured. Those are not the same thing." He took the file. He closed it. "I'll rule after a short recess." He left the bench the way he had entered, without theater, which is one definition of dignity. In the lobby, the floor was dry. The yellow sign leaned against the wall like a triangle that had remembered it was supposed to be a line. Karen stood in a pocket of shade thrown by the mezzanine and stared at the revolving doors. People came in, their faces plain with errands. People left, their faces complicated with outcomes. She thought of the word measured and hated it for being accurate. When they reconvened, justice happened without symbols. "On the request for a permanent restraining order," Judge Brooks said, "the petition is denied. The evidence, video, witness testimony, petitioner's own statements, does not establish harassment or credible threat. The petitioner's claimed fear is contradicted by her conduct." He did not look at her when he said contradicted. He looked at the file. The file did not blush. "On the issue of HOA enforcement," he continued, "this court does not supervise private associations wholesale, but it does on occasion note where private ordering simulates public harm. Rules must be written to be enforced, and written rules must be enforced uniformly. Anything else invites the appearance and effect of discrimination." He turned his face fully to Karen then. "Not unkind, not indulgent. Ms. Hastings," he said, "courts do not exist to launder personal discomfort into public policy. They exist to constrain it. This was not a punishment hearing. It was a measurement. You might consider what that means for the way you use authority." She opened her mouth, closed it, opened again. "Your Honor, with respect, this feels biased." "Bias," he said, "is not a feeling, it's a pattern. Feelings are what we have, while patterns are happening." He set conditions. Any further selective enforcement would invite sanctions. Retaliatory letters would be treated as contempt. Mediation was ordered between Harbor Ridge and the residents identified by counsel. A status date in 90 days. A suggestion, not a requirement, that the board review its bylaws with the assistance of counsel who has read the civil code. He tapped the gavel. The sound was small and final, like a lid closing on a jar that has been trying to breathe. "All rise," the bailiff said. Everyone did, in the human reflex to authority's choreography. The judge left. The room exhaled. Karen gathered papers that had not changed, but now weighed more. Out in the hallway, her shoes found the part of the floor that remembered looking like water. She stepped into the elevator and pushed L with the urgency of someone trying to alight from a story that had decided to keep her. At the last instant, a hand slid between the doors, not entitled, just practical, and he stepped in. Shirt sleeves now, robe folded elsewhere. The elevator hummed. They stood in the kind of silence people fill with their worst ideas. She populated it with an apology that would sound like a defense and a defense that would sound like an accusation. The elevator decided to rescue them by opening. They walked out together to the lobby's reflective brightness. She pivoted as if this were a hallway in a high school where gossip could be handled at science class volume. "I think," she said, "we got off on the wrong foot." He considered her, not unkindly. "We didn't get off on any foot," he said. "You chose a stance. I observed it." "You shouldn't be mopping," she heard herself say, and then realized she was confessing to an aesthetic preference dressed as ethics. She tried to amend. "I mean, you're the judge. It confuses people." "The message," he said, "is that necessary work deserves ordinary respect, whether the person doing it takes a bench at 9 or never does." He paused. "I do it once a week. It reminds me how the place is supposed to look. It also helps me catch the small broken things before they break larger ones." He gestured with his chin toward the caution sign. "I noticed last month the hinge was cracked. If it fell, somebody could slip. We replaced it. That's the job, too." He started to turn away, then added, "Not as a reprimand, but as a report." "You meant what you said this morning, Ms. Hastings. That's why I can help you." He left her with that, which is better than leaving someone with an apology. It invites work. Outside, she walked into a day that had not rearranged itself to accommodate her education. The wind disputed the flagpoles. The traffic performed indifference. She drove home through a city that had never been hers and had always been her problem. The mediation session a month later took place in a beige conference room that tried to hide the fact that a lot of truth has to be said under fluorescent lights. The mediator was kind and implacable. She asked questions that did not let people escape into nouns. Mr. Delgado spoke in 3 sentences that will outlast more legal briefs than most. "My son asked why his hair needs a rule. I told him it doesn't. But he heard the rule anyway, because when you hold power while saying a thing, kids learn it twice." The mediator wrote "learn twice" on a pad. Karen watched the words become more legible than her posture. The HOA adopted a policy committee, a real vote, written standards that meant what they said and said what they meant, enforcement matrices that measured conduct, not comfort. The phrase property values stopped appearing as a fig leaf over fear. Karen drafted the first letter herself. She crossed out elsewhere and wrote everyone. She changed aggressive body language to specific behavior observed. She ran the language through the sieve of, would this be true no matter who did it? Most sentences clumped and were thrown away. Sometimes at night she dreamt of the lobby and woke at the exact moment the caution sign learned to fold itself. She took that as instruction, not omen. On the 90-day status date, she arrived early. The lobby gleamed. The man in coveralls was there, finishing a last lane. He had not seen her yet. She stood a moment watching someone do a job correctly and did not feel smaller for it. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning, Ms. Hastings." "I used the wrong language," she said. It was not an apology. It was a diagnosis. "You used the language you had," he said. "Get more." Upstairs, the plaque again. Dept. 14. Inside, he wore the robe because the day asked him to. He reviewed the board's new rules. The enforcement logs that did not cluster by surname, the mediation report that used phrases like progress observed and trust increasing in measurable increments. He set another status for 6 months not because he had to, but because accountability is leisure's natural predator. Before adjourning, he said something that would have sounded trite if it had not been true. "Policy is language wearing boots," he said. "You have new words. Make them walk." He tapped the gavel. People rose. The court retired. Karen left the building through the same revolving doors into a day that had given nothing and taken only habits. She stood by the steps a long minute, thinking of rulers, the ones you use to measure and the ones you use to rule. She understood she had been using one as the other. On a Wednesday evening in the fall, she drafted an email to Harbor Ridge that did not ask to be admired. "We confused enforcement with fairness. We will stop doing that. We will write what we mean and mean it for everyone. If my position made some of you smaller, I will use it now to make room." She pressed send without polishing it into something expensive. The message left and did not return. That is one way to know a sentence has done its job. She began to notice how often she had been arguing with mirrors. She began to ask better questions before she asked any others. She began, which is rare enough. As for Judge Brooks, on Thursdays, he still came early. He still checked hinges and rails and the places where water wants to collect into future lawsuits. He still wrung the mop with the practiced twist of a man who knows small maintenance prevents large tragedy. If someone asked him why a judge mops a lobby, he said, "Because clean floors and clean records are made the same way." If someone asked whether he had enjoyed the moment she recognized him, he said, "Enjoyment is not the point. Continuity is." Quiet revenge is the kind you cannot Instagram. It's a hinge repaired, a policy rewritten, a child swimming without being asked to translate his existence into a rule. It is the sound a gavel makes when it falls at the same volume for every name. The lesson does not clap for itself. It waits. It measures. It repeats until learned. Measure yourself before enforcing others. If this hit, share it with one person who needs a reminder. Measure yourself before enforcing others. Next, watch Everyone Said the Billionaire's Daughter. Here, subscribe for daily hidden tales, stories told cold and precise.